This is Fit to Succeed in partnership with NordicFitnessEducation.com with hosts Ben Pratt. Thanks for joining us.
Not only do people experience skin manifestations when their gut goes awry, but if someone has something like, say, eczema or chronic hives, or they're constantly getting contact dermatitis, if you can tune up the gut a little bit, you'll actually see the skin begin to clear from the inside out.
Hello and welcome to this Fit to Succeed podcast. I'm excited today to have with me Dr. Jillian Teta, who is a naturopathic physician from the United States. She's the author of Natural Solutions for Digestive Health.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm super excited for our chat this morning.
Yeah, I am as well, particularly because digestion for me is one of those areas that has personal appeal. I have a gluten sensitivity and have had for many years. And so as we discuss digestive things, I can relate to anybody out there who might be struggling.
It's amazing. I mean, the gut is just one of those foundational aspects of our body that impacts everything every single day. So
yeah, it absolutely does. Now, just prior to us jumping into some of these deeper discussions around digestive health, you have a history as a competitive athlete, actually. You were a pro figure bodybuilder, I suppose. I don't know, was a bodybuilder, an athlete. And as you did that, I can imagine that you must have had some familiarity with the need to be very careful in your diet and your habits with your food. What did your athletic experiences in the past teach you about food and diet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for your listeners, I'm a retired professional figure competitor, which doesn't sound very glamorous. But what I will say is that journey and what it has taught me about like the application of food, like as a means to create an end, the main lessons I gleaned is that consistency is so important. So with any type of intervention, whether it's a dietary intervention or a working out intervention or like whatever your goals are, giving yourself the space to be consistent over a period of time is really going to maximize the potential for you to actually realize your goals. And I think it's easier for us to lose sight of that in the health realm because in the US, at least, we are so obsessed with like right here, right now, we need everything done yesterday that if an intervention doesn't work in a day or two, it's like we abandon it when really we need that consistency to yield change. So sometimes one little thing will give us huge benefit immediately and we'll see that immediate change, but more often than not, we need to apply those principles like in a consistent, steady way over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I can see the need for that. So often people are after that quick fix idea. You know, I want to lose weight because it's the summer and I want to go on holiday or something along those lines. Whereas with digestive health, it probably applies just like it did when you were a pro figure athlete, that there's this need for longer term, slow guidance throughout, making sure that the body is having its chance to heal and become well.
Absolutely. I mean, again, some things change real quick, but if someone has been struggling with their digestion or any health complaint for a long time, often we need a little bit of space too to back out of that. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, drink green juice and like take some probiotics and like I'm ready to roll. It's often more involved than that.
Yeah, I totally take that on board. So where did your interest in natural health actually stem from prior to you taking your formal naturopathic physician qualifications?
Yeah, that's another great question. So as a child, I really grew up in the woods, like exploring the woods, loving nature. And my parents were more what we call in the US kind of like earthy, crunchy, more hippie types, right? And so I sort of had this bias growing up towards things that are more natural. When I began college, university, I was in a pre-medical program. However, I was sort of put off by the conventional approach, the reductionistic approach of like, if you have disease A, here's drug A. I was looking for something more than that. And so I found out about naturopathic medical school, which essentially gives you all of the information about diagnosis and the drugs and treatments, but also then gives you all of the information about nutrition and supplementation and herbs and counseling and exercise and environmental medicine. So you have more tools in your toolbox than drugs, procedures, and surgery. So it's not that I'm against those things. I actually am quite conventionally trained, but often there's so much more that we can do in our lifestyle. And that to me is what is so appealing. Using our lifestyle, we call this natural when really it's more just like common sense, right? Like what you eat, how you move, even what you think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I understand that. So just listening to what you said there, are you saying that you originally had looked to go down the mainstream medical route to become a doctor?
Yeah, I was sort of lined up in that route to go that way. And then through a very bizarre circumstance, through actually a woman who bred dogs, I met a naturopathic doctor and my whole sort of trajectory changed. But I have a master's degree in environmental biology and energy analysis, which is essentially environmental biology. And so I've always had this connection with ecology and the interconnected web of everything, not just ecosystems, but also the human body. So we can draw that metaphor, like the human body is its own ecosystem and contains many other ecosystems, right? So it's very similar principles. You can't pull on one strand without having reverberations through the whole system.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. I think many people probably can. It's in a very simple analogy, it's the leg bones connected to the hip bone type mentality. But
Yes.
it's not just the skeleton. It's all parts of our body are connected. And as you kind of alluded to there, we're even connected to the environmental things outside of us and how they affect us, and particularly with the gut. And we'll talk a little bit more about things like the microbiome later on.
Yes.
Now, you chose specifically to specialize in digestive health. Was there a particular point that you can think of when that was the area that sparked your interest?
Well, Ben, you might laugh at this, but when I first started practicing, I had no idea that this was what I was going to end up doing. But what I will say is that that is who showed up to the clinic, and that is who presented themselves to me, was that the vast majority of everybody that I was talking to all had some level of digestive distress. It was like everybody that I talked to was struggling with their guts. And so applying those principles, right? Looking at the diet, looking at the ability to digest, looking at the health of the microbiome, looking at the lining of the GI tract, looking at the balance of the immune system and the second brain, and all of those things began to create frameworks to help these people. And then, as they say, one thing led to another, started getting really fabulous results. And that leads to like a little word of mouth type situation. And, back in the 2009 or whatever, my sister-in-law, Jill Coleman, was starting to get into the internet, and so was Jade. And they were like, oh, you got to go online. So I took that whole thing online, and then that turned into the Facebook page, which turned into the book deal, which turned into like everything afterwards. So I actually had no intention of specializing in digestive health, but that is where I've ended up because that is where the need was. And then it's what I'm good at.
So it
was
was
a very strange superpower to like help people poop. It's like, that's my super, like I will make your bathroom experience better, whatever that is. Like I will help you. So.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting. And I thought there might've been a story there in the background of you finding this real area of interest as you studied, but it was post qualification. It was once you were actually practicing that you realized that really there's a major issue here with people's digestion.
Yep. And you kind of hear in school like, oh, digestive complaints are really common, IBS really common. But then when you kind of get on the ground and you get in the trenches with people, it's like breathtaking. At least in the U.S. it is. The U.S. spends close to $1 billion on digestive aids. So like laxatives, not even like all digestive products, but like laxatives. This is an enormous amount of money.
So people are really blocked up.
People are really struggling. Yes.
That's kind of interesting. I practice on the side. I mean, I'm primarily a personal trainer and educator, but I do practice nutrition on the side. And I would say, to echo what you're saying, in the few clients that I see from time to time, that there is very commonly a digestive problem. And so I would tend to agree with what you're saying. Now, you may have heard this, but many experts have identified digestion as being one of those things that is upstream from other digestive complaints or other health complaints even. Would you be able to elaborate on this concept for the listeners? What do we mean by it being upstream?
Well, you mean like all disease starts in the gut, like Hippocrates?
Yes, like that.
Said? Yeah. So the issue with the digestive system is that it is linked to and has a relationship with so many other systems of the body. So it plays a role in, we can just take anything, for example, or we'll use multiple examples, but for example, detoxification. So our liver helps our body remove toxicants from the blood, and it packages them up and sends them to the the large intestine so we can poop them out, or it sends them to the kidneys so we can pee them out, or we sweat them out. So it plays a major role in detoxification, reducing our burden. It also plays a huge role in defense, right? Housing the vast majority of our immune system. So it is implicated in inflammatory and autoimmune conditions, right? So we're having reverberations that way. It's also involved in hormonal health and recycling, like the creation, activation, and removal of hormones. And it also has implications for our neurological system, like our brain and spinal cord functioning. It's in a two-way relationship within our second brain. And so if our digestive system is compromised, like what do we just do? Like name 5 things just like off the cuff. That means if you are pulling on that thread, that digestive system, you can have reverberations throughout. And I especially see this with folks that have autoimmune conditions, like particularly that. So absolutely, because our digestive systems play such a foundational role. They're like King's Cross Station in London. Like everything goes to it and everything goes out from it. It is centrally located and centrally important.
That's really fascinating, because what you're saying there is it's even more than just that the nutrients that are available in food have to first be digested before we can access them. And that's an important point, but you're saying it's connected much more integrally to our health through the nervous system, through the brain, and all those other aspects.
Yes, it is an integral part of health. It absolutely is. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. And so bearing that in mind, if the digestive system is off just a little bit, what sort of effects can that potentially have on the body?
If you're like just experiencing a transient blip, I don't know, you get overstressed, you're underslept, and like maybe you have a few bad days where you're not eating great or whatever, you're not going to experience that much body-wide effects. You might feel more tired or whatever. You're mostly going to experience like local effects in the gastrointestinal system. But say that goes a little bit longer, a little bit more chronic. What could we experience? You can begin to experience aberrations in any of those things that we just discussed. So you might notice, I don't know, you're getting beyond the gut. You might notice like, oh, my skin is like itchy, or I'm like tired all the time, or I have brain fog, or now my joints and my muscles are all stiff and sore. These are, and it can be tricky because these are what we call generalized symptoms. They can be created by literally dozens of other things, but many of those things can be arising from dysfunction in the gastrointestinal system as well. And so we always look back to that in any type of chronic complaint. Again, particularly those autoimmune complaints, which of course is another manifestation of like really long-term unchecked inflammation in the lining of the GI tract itself that the immune system hasn't been able to resolve.
That's interesting that what you said there, particularly, you may be aware of Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who does a lot of work on the gut and her connections with the gut and the brain. And she's always talks about that the skin is a mirror to the gut. And that when the gut is off, the skin usually shows it.
Well, it's interesting because, in utero, embryologically, as humans are being built in their mama's bellies, the same cells are used to build the lining of the GI tract in our skin,
really?
our external skin.
Fascinating.
So as adults, histologically, the two are different histologically, but they have the same origin. And you will find not only do people experience skin manifestations when their gut goes awry, but if someone has something like, say, eczema or chronic hives, or they're constantly getting contact dermatitis, if you can tune up the gut a little bit, maybe swap out the diet a little bit, maybe add on some probiotics or fermented foods, or just manage the gut flora a little bit better, you'll actually see the skin begin to clear.
Yeah.
From the inside out. So yes, the two are definitely mirrors of one another. They can be, at least.
Yeah, I have personal experience of that with one of my kids who had some food issues early on in his life, and we removed those offending foods, did our best to heal his gut, and any issues he was seeing in his skin cleared up.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. That's interesting because you'll notice, and you probably noticed this like when your children were infants and you're introducing the solid foods, right? Like one of the big things that happens with this introduction of solid foods is you'll get, a little bit of a diaper rash, or you'll get like a little bit of eczema. And that's actually quite common as the microbiome and the immune system kind of get used to and learn to tolerate these new foods. But in adults, we also can see things like eczema and psoriasis be greatly worsened or improved based on not just the food that we're eating, but also the general health of the gut.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's just in your experience to date, at this point as a practicing doctor, what have you found to be perhaps the 3 most common digestive complaints that you have to address in your practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say gas and bloating. I kind of put those as one. Constipation, right? that billion-dollar industry, yes. Constipation, and then irritable bowel syndrome.
IBS really is up there.
Yeah. So IBS is characterized by an imbalance in the microbiome and an imbalance in the second brain. And so it can manifest as constipation, diarrhea, the two going back and forth. Folks with IBS are often more sensitive to pain, unfortunately, and they're more likely to get things like depression and hives and like all of those other concomitant things that we talk about.
I think that's fascinating because as you talk about those 3 things, gas and bloating, constipation, and IBS, but yet just a minute ago, you also talked about that many of the issues that are caused as a result of digestive distress are actually symptoms that are away from the digestive system itself. So bearing in mind that that digestive complaints don't always manifest as digestive problems, how can people try to improve the health of the digestion?
Yeah. Well, so that's great. So what I'd like to say is like, if someone is listening in and they're like, well, I don't have any digestive complaints at all. How do I know that my gut's all right? Most of the time, if you're not experiencing digestive distress, you're A-okay. The exception being if there's like frank autoimmunity, and there's autoimmune issues, then I would think about treating the gut whether or not symptoms were present.
Are there any particular autoimmune conditions that you've tended to find that people should be mindful of, just so that we can dial it in a bit, because there's an awful lot?
So Hashimoto's is a huge one. So Hashimoto's is probably the most, Hashimoto's and celiac disease, right? And celiac disease, that is the immune system is destroying the lining of the small intestine upon presence of gluten. So the treatment for that is actually a gluten-free diet for life. So there's those 2, celiac, Hashimoto's, and then things like rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis are ones that I see all of the time.
Okay, I see. Okay, yeah, fascinating. That's
and lupus. Yeah, so in lupus as well.
I was wondering if you're going to mention lupus, but okay, yeah, totally agree. So you're saying that all of those autoimmune conditions, in your experience as a doctor, have always had a digestive sort of underlying problem.
Yeah, so I avoid using words like always just to avoid the whole blanket statement concept.
Good.
But because that lion's share of the immune system resides in the GI tract, and because the GI tract is the gateway to the rest of the body, when someone comes to me and they have autoimmune condition, I will absolutely take them through what I call a gut restoration protocol, which essentially is having a good look at the diet, eliminating the foods that are problematic for folks with autoimmunity, like gluten, to your point, sprucing them up with some enzymes, healing up the lining of the GI tract, and giving them nutrients, like even simple things like vitamin A and vitamin D to help balance that inflammatory response and quell the immune system. So for me, clinically, I almost always will approach the gut in folks with autoimmunity.
Fantastic. I really like how you made that connection again there between gut health and the immune system, because that's where so much of our immunity resides. I think that makes so much sense. Now, bearing in mind that this podcast, this expert interview series that we do, Jillian, is primarily fixed towards personal trainers, fitness trainers, people like that.
Yeah.
These are people who will not be allowed to provide supplemental advice within their scope of professional practice. So what sort of simple steps potentially could a personal trainer do to help a client support their gut health?
Yeah, this is great. So with this, I focus on the really, really simple basic things, like the ways in which we eat. So something that a personal trainer can coach their clients for is when they're eating, they should be sitting down when they're eating, and they should be eating slowly, and they should be chewing their food really well until it is soft. The other things that a personal trainer can do for their clients is they can ask the questions, right? How's your gut? Do you poop every day? Do you feel gas? And like, are you bloated? Like, what's going on in your GI tract? Because even having a little bit of knowledge, it's almost as if we can predict problems for our clients and help adjust them, particularly because, as I'm sure you know, when you're first starting to work with a client, and you're changing up their nutrition a little bit, and maybe you're changing up their exercise a little bit, digestive complaints are actually really common to experience in any type of dietary change. So also coaching your clients like, hey, as we're increasing your vegetables and protein, you might notice in the bathroom, like there's some blips in the road, so to speak. Those should self-resolve in a couple weeks, but if not, like, let me know and we'll troubleshoot some more. So just coaching people on like how to eat, and also just to let them know that you've got their back and that you're going to help them through that, I think is great.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a nice, simple, usable advice. Chew your food, eat lots of vegetables, sort of plant matter rather than just grain-based fiber, which tends to be where a lot of that advice traditionally comes from. But absolutely. Yeah. Don't eat 12 servings of grains a day. I don't know like what your government, guidelines are, like this flavor of the month or whatever, like this year, but ours are fairly ridiculous too. Like, yes, 12 servings of bread a day. No, absolutely not. Now,
or not, or don't do that, right? Like, or just don't do that.
Indeed. And we're not saying we're anti-carbohydrate. We're just saying too much grain-based fiber is like putting sandpaper down your gut for sure. Now, the microbiome, or the gut flora, as we might refer to it, has received a huge amount of attention in the scientific publications over the last number of years, as well as an increasing amount of attention in the press. And I've heard, as I imagine you have as well, Jillian, huge claims about the influence that the microbiome or the gut flora can have, even to the point now that it seems that every supplement company is trying to sell probiotics. And there's a huge differential in that. Now, that's a discussion for another day, but I want us to focus on the gut microbiome itself. And is all of this media attention and all of this hype, is it justified in your opinion?
Well, actually, I think it is justified. So let me back up for a second and get your listener, everyone up to speed. You guys probably already know this, but our microbiome it's like a colony, an ecosystem, as it were, of beneficial bacteria. And the number of cells is estimated from anywhere from 1 trillion to 100 trillion bacterial non-human cells that are all working together to do basically everything for our body, not just helping with digestion, helping with immune function, but even like our blood lipids and our waist circumference and our mental emotional game. So here's the cool thing. We as humans only have about 1 to 10 trillion cells. So we are at least as bacterial as we are human. Okay, so
we even outnumbered by the sounds of it.
we could potentially be vastly outnumbered by our gut flora. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about it that way, of course, they would be so heavily impactful. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, like all of the hype is justified. Every single chronic disease that we have documented, we also can go back and find either linkages or correlations or aberrations in the microbiome. And I think, so this is exciting because we're starting to see the fruits of the research of the last several decades. And then as we move forward, we're going to see the fruits of like this momentum and what is coming from there. So absolutely, the microbiome is involved in everything. What we don't know is there's a couple things we don't know. We don't know how everything works together. Mm-hmm. And the conventional community, because it is so reductionistic, what they're doing is they are studying specific strains.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
This
so
strain calls this, or does it bring?
Yes. So like what the strain that's in a line like that, the Lactobacillus planarum, and like there's lots of different patented Lactobacillus strains now. But of course, these strains don't work in isolation. They're working with everything else in the microbiome, in that ecology. And so what we haven't teased out yet are all of those relationships. Mm-hmm. What we do have is we have generalized trends. We definitely have some strains that we know are bad and that can be correlated with things like IBS or inflammatory bowel disease and even depression, even the neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's disease. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that we are learning, and then there's even more that we don't know.
Wow, fascinating. It sounds like we could probably do a whole, just seeing your passion, we could do a whole podcast just on the microbiome.
Oh, we definitely could. Yes. I love the microbiome. I think it's great. I mean, also, I like bacteria. I know I brew kombucha. Bacteria are so important for like soil and gardening. So again, it's just those, it's like that metaphor that just has so many different facets in so many different areas of life. Like it's not just our gut health. It's like everywhere.
Yeah, I really enjoy things like sauerkraut and kimchi and some of those fermented vegetables. They're delicious. Absolutely. Yes. Now we're kind of coming up on time here, so I've got one last question I want to ask you, if that's all right, Jillian.
Yes.
If we could go back to the day that you graduated from your degree, I mean your naturopathic physician qualification, and you were able to know what you now know, and as you started out on your career, what one bit of advice could you give yourself?
Oh, this is a great question. And what I would say is start your email list today.
No one's ever said that. That's very interesting.
And here's why. It's not even just like a business thing. It's an impact thing.
Right.
I am only one person. So I can only sit across from one person at a time. I love doing things like this, chatting with you, Ben, because now I get to talk to your listeners. I love like being on different blogs or those types of things because it amplifies and spreads the message. Same with your email list. So through an email list, you get thousands and thousands of people from all over the world that wouldn't have heard your message otherwise. People that I'll never sit across from can benefit from these things that we're talking about through that. So in order to spread my message better, I would tell myself, my 2007 self, start your email list today.
That's great advice, and I'm sure many of the listeners out there who are budding trainers, health enthusiasts, let's impact the world through email, through social media, all of those things. That's fantastic.
That is my number one thing, is get that email list started, because your social media accounts, I hate to say it, they can get shut down. Like Instagram can make my stuff go away like that. Facebook is like, oh, you posted something inappropriate. I post a lot about poop and farts and, all this kind of stuff, right? Pictures of parasites, like these types of things. So your social media can dissolve, but your email list, that's yours.
Yeah. So that's your only true audience, they always say in business, don't they? Is your email list, because they're like yours.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be what I would say. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Jillian, it's been so great talking to you today all about digestive health. Really appreciate your expertise and your time. And I wish you healthy digestive health.
Ben, I wish you digestive bliss too. And thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share via social media. You can also rate the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. If you'd like to know more about us, then check out our range of online courses at www.nordicfitnesseducation.com.